All right, Hell is Us. Let's get into it.
Reveal, Hell is Us has been something of an enigma. As an action RPG that hones in on detective-style investigations within a hauntingly alluring world filled with weird monsters to explore, it's a type of game that tasks players to meet it on its strange and unorthodox terms. For its developers, Hell is Us also represents a game that pushes back against contemporary trends of gaming that places its story and gameplay in a neat package and instead trusts players to piece together just what the hell is going on within the corrupted land of Hadia and how to survive it.
I don't know how you managed to get here, and I don't...
Now, I don't know if this is like a smaller developer, but what I noticed about a lot of games lately is they don't, I don't know, it's not a lot of games that blow me away graphically, and that's okay. I'd rather a great gameplay experience before like super amazing graphics, but this game doesn't look like a super next gen game, and I'm okay with that, but I just had to point that out.
Care.
After playing several hours of the opening of Hell is Us, along with some mid-game dungeon crawling, I came away with a clearer idea of developer Rogue Factor's new weird influence take on an action-adventure game that pushes players to mind the finer details of the world and maintain poise during some of the intense engagements. So far, Hell is Us is a game that makes charting out into a familiar yet deeply alien
Where did that
world
sword come
feel
from?
Captivating.
This game is going to be wild.
Hell is Us takes place in an alternate 1990s, where the fictional European country Hadia is in the midst of a civil war following the events of a mysterious, supernatural incursion known as the Calamity. Playing as Remy, a United Nations peacekeeper and former resident of Hadia, he's detained by a mysterious organization following his mission into Hadia to find his parents. With the organization and its leader pressing down on Remy, he has to recall the fateful decisions he made with the surviving factions and how he fought off the seemingly otherworldly creatures known as Hollow Walkers.
Hollow Walkers. Okay, that was some enemies, man. I was wondering that.
The main plot of Hell is Us reminded me of a mix between Death Stranding and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, which focuses on immersing players into a world that takes a sudden and violent turn to the weird, and with a seemingly unreliable protagonist recounting his interpretation of events. Hell is Us fully commits to its premise of a bleak setting and being a stranger in an even stranger land, one that feels familiar with its backwoods and small towns clinging onto survival, but feels so disorientingly strange with the rise of Hollow Walkers and portals that have turned the European countryside into an alien landscape.
You're either brave or stupid to have made a run for it. My money's on stupid.
What immediately drew me into Hell is Us was its unusual approach to storytelling and immersing players within its strange world. The sense of mystery is palpable in Hell is Us, and I was constantly walking into areas that had grotesque monsters or strange anomalies that drew my eye. I was especially taken in by the plight of the surviving characters, who struggled to endure in their ramshackle sanctuaries held together by duct tape and dwindling hope. This story very much chucks you into the deep end with its narrative and gameplay flow as you explore the different open zones filled with their puzzles and points of interest.
Why is this happening?
So, I'm wondering if this game is going to be like, I guess it's going to be like open, linear, like kind of sandboxy, like where there's a defined path that you need to go on, but there'll be several deviations from that path, but it's not exactly a open world. That's what it's looking like to me so far.
What I found most intriguing, and what I suspect many players will have to come to grips with, is how Hell is Us takes a largely unguided approach to gathering intel and charting out to complete quests with no mini-maps or waypoints to help you in your trek. This very 90s adventure game approach puts the onus on players to listen to the details that the surviving characters bring up in conversations and read the well-organized intel from Remy's personal datapad. It's the type of game that demands a certain level of attention, or else you can find yourself wandering at length to figure out where to go next.
How the hell did you find us?
Nah, I already see people complaining about that, like an action game with a very with like a detective element where you really have to listen to the dialogue. I already see like the typical action fans, like somebody that's a fan of like Stellar Blade or like Devil May Cry coming into this game. They're gonna probably be expecting that, but they're not gonna get that. But where it's to the point where you have to really pay attention to what the characters are saying. So that's gonna disappoint some people. I'm not gonna lie. Me personally, I like the detective element, but that's definitely gonna disappoint some people.
Outer Wilds is a particular example that inspired the development team for its approach to a largely unguided adventure game that gradually expands in scope as more players use their growing knowledge.
Okay.
Speaking with creative director Jonathan Jacques Belletet, the approach the devs took with Hell Is Us was about trusting players with figuring out the mystery and embracing the campaign's more methodical approach to progression.
You must be lost to wander around Sinedra Forest. I'm afraid I have very little to offer.
Hell Is Us is equal parts an investigation game and an action RPG, and there's a surprising amount of combat to engage with while you're on the desolate road. On the surface, Hell Is Us has the makings of a Souls-like, and it certainly has some of those elements under the hood, but it goes in a direction with combat and power progression that's more about managing your poise and picking out the best moments to strike against enemies that can easily take you out. Some of my favorite moments came using my powered-up weapons to dish out some chunky damage while sending in my drone to stun other enemies off in the wings. The Hollow Walkers in Hell Is Us are some of the most visually distinct and unnerving video game enemies I've seen in a long time. They're highly aggressive and can come in large numbers. Still, things get more unnerving once you face off against the powered-up walkers that can summon support enemies that were very much giving the angels from Neon Genesis Evangelion vibes.
Low-key.
Once those enemies
I feel
appear,
that.
You'll have to switch up to take them down fast before you can finish off the main walker. Much like a Souls game, stamina management is critical for survival, and I found myself constantly having to be decisive with my skills so as not to overextend myself against unforgiving enemies. One interesting wrinkle that took me time to get used to was the fact that health and stamina share a single bar. With your health being your primary source, the more health you lose in a fight, the less stamina you'll have to fight.
That makes sense. That's a nice little wrinkle to the typical Souls elements. I feel like with the combat, especially from what I'm seeing here and what I've seen in a couple of the trailers, like the combat is really gonna open up as you level up your weapons and you learn more combos and shit like that. I'm interested to see that, because as you can see, we have like I'm assuming these are drone abilities over here, and then these are gonna be your weapon abilities, and then these are gonna be your consumables like your health and shit like that, and probably throwables and amps to your stats and shit like that. But that's a nice little wrinkle that they put into it. I dig it.
While you have limited health items, the Limbic Pulse skill is the best way to help you stay in the fight. Similar to Nioh 1 and 2, activating the Pulse immediately after seeing a glow around Remy will instantly restore health and stamina based on the attacks you dish out.
That's
it's
tough.
A very risk-reward approach to combat, and depending on how intense the combat gets, it can be easy to forget to hit the Pulse and lose out on health. I found the engagements surprisingly challenging and unrelenting, yet I still felt good about scraping through once I figured out how best to clear out the foes. Combat took the most time for me to get used to, as it's far more survival and resource driven than Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Some battles were so unforgiving that I felt unfairly outmatched by the numbers and aggression of the walkers. Still, I managed to rally and rethink my approach by going for it. According to the creative director,
that's all.
He likened their approach to combat with the act of boxing, which is also about managing stamina and dealing with decisive blows when you can.
Yep. Counter punching, knowing when to guard, and when they go for your openings, you know,
impressed with the
protecting
visuals
yourself
and atmosphere
at all times.
Of Hell Is Us, and it presents such a compelling yet still bizarre mix of fantasy and science fiction. Along with the other games mentioned, another piece of media that served as a key influence was Alex Garland's 2018 film Annihilation, which dealt with exploring an environment that underwent radical and violent change.
See, now I gotta watch that movie.
An intriguing setting, but at times, the hardened and traditional adventure game approach Hell Is Us takes to taking in the details and surviving this world felt a bit too stoic for its own good.
Okay.
Still, I was very invested in the bizarre, new, weird setting that Rogue Factor has crafted, and it so far has the makings of being one of 2025's more original and creative takes on the action RPG experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Given that this year saw the rise of Blue Prince's reinvention of a roguelite puzzle adventure, it'd be fitting for Hell Is Us to succeed with its own reinvention with its new type of role-playing experience. For more on the latest upcoming games, check out our recent previews of Lies of P Overture and Shadow Labyrinth.
Oh, they got a Lies of P Overture? Oh, shit.
Summer Game Fest 2025, IGN Live, and of course, for everything else in the world of video games, stick with IGN.
All right. All right, so Hell Is Us. It's a action RPG with some investigative elements. You do have to, in order to advance the plot, you do have to interview people and ask them what's going on, ask them what they see, or you'll just be running around in circles. What interests me the most about this game is the combat system. It looks dope. It borrows elements from other Souls-like games like Neo, with that pulse thing that you see right there. I like how you share the health bar with the stamina, so the more damage you take, the more the lower your stamina gets. That adds an extra wrinkle, extra challenge to it that I don't think any other like Souls-like game have done. I'm not saying this is a Souls-like game, but the combat does have elements of it. So I'm interested to see how that works as you go along, and I'm interested to see like the abilities down here between the drone and the weapons. I'm definitely into this game. So yeah, but y'all let me know how y'all feel down in the comments, all right? So y'all already know the vibes. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. So boy, JusticeXFalls, and we out. One.